What's up, everyone? 5280 Reefer here, back at you again with another episode. So, in this episode, we talk carbon dosing. So, carbon dosing is a interesting thing that a lot of people are either very scared of or all for it. And in the latest of times, you can see many companies like Tropic Marin, Fauna Marin, Red Sea, and many other companies kind of gravitating more towards carbon dosing as the form of nutrient control and to make sure that our reef tanks are not carbon limited. So this is the way that I look at carbon dosing. Yes, there is risks involved in it. You know, there's absolutely a chance of you crashing your tank when doing carbon dosing, but I don't think we really have to worry about that if we do things like we do everything else in this hobby, which is to be patient, not to overdo it, and record everything as you should be by doing weekly testing, just so you can see your nutrients. Are they on a trend up? Are they on a trend down? Or are they just being maintained? So the reason why I see a lot of people have issues with something like Nopox or any of these other over-the-counter or bottled carbon dosing methods is that they'll look at what the bottle says and just go directly for it and follow it to a T. That's all good and great, but we got to think about this. Our tanks might not be the same as the testing tank that Red Sea used when they were formulating and developing their Nopox. You know, they might have a much bigger tank that is very mature, has a lot of biodiversity and bioload in it. So when they use that Nopox in their tank, it might have a completely different effect than it would in your tank, let's say, that may be potentially younger, not as mature, and not as heavily bioloaded as their system. So we can't really look at those instructions and be like, okay, then that's how I'm going to dose as well, and I should have the same effects. No, we should kind of dial things down. If it says to do 10 milliliters per 100 gallons, start with 5, 4, and then maintain that for a week straight, and then see what's happened to your tank. And it might take longer than just a week for you to see the results. It might be so little, so minute, like your bacterial colonies are just starting to expand, that it's not really affecting anything. But once it hits a certain threshold, your nutrients are going to start coming down quickly. And that's kind of what I noticed in my tank. When I started doing my own DIY version of carbon dosing, I was testing once a week. And for the first week, I didn't really see much of a change, especially since I shut my refugium down. My nutrients kind of were still creeping upwards. But then on the second week, my nutrients went down. And then I was like, okay, well, I can see a difference now. And then on the third week, I saw that it maintained that slow downward trend for my nutrients. I was like, okay, cool. I was like, well, what if I increase it a little bit? By how much faster will those nutrients go down on a weekly basis? And that's how I was able to establish, basically in my tank, that 8 milliliters every night. I dose at nighttime so I don't feed the dinoflagellates. So 1 hour after my lights go off, I'll go up and I'll hand dose the carbon into the tank. But for me, 8 milliliters a night will slowly allow the nutrients to creep upwards on a weekly basis by about 2 ppm for nitrate and 0.02 to 0.04 for phosphate. And then 10 milliliters a night just maintains my nutrients. So they don't go up or down, they just stay consistent. And at 12 milliliters, it slowly goes down. So I'm actually going down about 2 ppm a week for my nitrates and about 0.02 to 0.04 for phosphates. So that's how I was able to dial in what I needed to do. But as my tank matures, I'm going to have to make sure that I continue my weekly dosing. So let's say once the coral get bigger, the fish get bigger, you know, things like that. Well, that 12 mil might actually be doing way more than 2 ppm, or the 10 mil a night might not be maintaining anymore. And now my nutrients are, I need to even lessen that since my corals are taken up more and more. So we just need to be very watchful and keep a log of everything, as we should be. We do weekly testing anyways. There's a reason why we do it. We want to see the trends that are happening in our reef aquaria. So my recipe for carbon is a DIY version. As I've stated before, it's 250 mils of vodka, 25 mils of distilled vinegar, and 1 teaspoon of sugar. And it's pretty cheap that way. I think it ends up costing me about $7 a month to be able to carbon dose my tank. And the main reason why I decided to go with carbon dosing over refugium was that I noticed when I had my refugium running, it did wonders for bringing my nutrients down. I mean, I had to reduce the hours that the light was on in the refugium and everything. I mean, it was very ready to strip my tank of any nutrients. But the problem is on my monthly ICP tests, I noticed that all my trace elements were getting bottomed out, and especially heavy ones were like molybdenum, iron. So I started dosing those things, and on a twice a week basis, just to keep the chaeto alive and keep it growing. And you know, I thought in my head, I was like, well, I'd rather be dosing trace elements for my corals, not my macroalgae. Like, that's not what I'm here for. So in my case, that was kind of the reason. And also like cleaning the chaeto and it gunking up the baffles, and I would have to pull chaeto out of the baffles. It was nasty. And then the foam sponges I had to clean constantly because there would just be algae growing all over it for the baffles. And it was a pain in the neck. With carbon dosing, I no longer need to do that. You know, my sump has become a cryptic zone. I have a massive sponge growing in my sump, and I mean it's huge, which it's wonderful. That means I have a mature and healthy tank that can actually sustain sponges. And another thing I wanted to talk about too, I see a lot of people like, oh, I'd rather dose bacteria than do carbon dosing. And at the end of the day, dosing bacteria and carbon dosing reach the same end. It's just two different ways of getting to that end. So when we're dosing bacteria into our tank on a weekly basis, all we're doing is adding billions of bacterial spores into our water column that are then going to come alive and go into the water column, go all over the surfaces, and start doing their job, right? Well, carbon dosing kind of achieves the same thing, but instead of us adding bacteria into our tanks, we're adding a fuel source for the bacteria to be able to use so they multiply really, really quickly and then achieve the same goal as dosing the bacteria. One key difference is that there is such a thing as succession. So 1 or 2 or 3 bacteria over a very long amount of time will kind of beat out everything else if we don't keep introducing new bacterial species into the tank. So as a maintenance, every 2 months, I do like to throw in a little bit of Dr. Tim's One and Only, a little bit of Turbo Start or any of those other ones, and just throw that into the mix just to keep the variety of bacteria good, so I don't have bacterial succession where, as I said, like 2 or 3 of the bacteria take over the tank, and I don't think that would be very healthy, as we're trying to maintain a very healthy biome of having a vast diversity of bacteria and microorganisms and fauna in our tank. But yeah, guys, so that's my take on carbon dosing, my thoughts behind it, and my methodology. I know it sounds dangerous and risky, but pretty much anything is in reef aquaria. If we leave the light on too long in our refugiums, we can strip our water, which can cause a crash as well. So everything in moderation. Nothing good comes quickly, and nothing good happens fast. So take everything slow, take it easy, make sure to do